Killed before 30, decapitated with one stroke, buried with honor by people who knew him. For over a decade, nobody could explain where he came from. DNA from inside his skull finally answered. He had crossed the entire Roman Empire to die in an arena in northern England. And he was not alone. In the summer months of 2004, a quiet garden in York became the site of an unexpected excavation. Construction workers uncovered a patch of ground that, within days, revealed a dense cluster of human remains. Archaeologists opened a trench just 2 meters deep and found themselves mapping grave after grave. The field team logged each discovery on detailed sheets, marking the position and depth of every skeleton. By the end of the dig, nearly 80 bodies had been recorded, all adult males. Each grave was carefully inventoried, with measurements taken of every bone and artifact. The men buried here were not ordinary townsfolk. Their bones told a different story. Thickened muscle attachments along the arms and legs showed years of punishing physical training. Humeral shafts and femoral ridges stood out, more robust than what is seen in most Roman-era remains. Some of the skeletons had iron rings around their ankles, still locked in place after centuries underground. The arrangement of the graves suggested a deliberate pattern, not a haphazard disposal. Most of the bodies were laid out with care, some with pottery fragments or animal bones placed beside them. The field archaeologist recorded the sequence in the log, each skeleton numbered, each grave mapped, each artifact catalogued. The evidence, written in bone and iron, pointed to lives spent in hardship and discipline. Among these men, one would soon draw special attention, not for how he was buried, but for what his bones would later reveal. The field osteologist began the next stage with a careful examination of each skeleton. The men in these graves showed the unmistakable marks of lives spent in combat and training. Thick ridges on the arms and legs, far above what is seen in most Roman burials, spoke of years wielding weapons and enduring hard labor. The bones told a story of repeated injury and survival. Several femurs and humeri had healed from fractures, the new bone dense and irregular. Some ribs bore the signs of past trauma, blunt force impacts that had mended before death arrived. These were men who had survived more than one violent encounter, yet the violence did not end in life. More than half of the skeletons had been decapitated. The cuts at the neck were clean, often delivered from behind, and the skulls were not discarded. Instead, the heads were placed with care, sometimes laid on the chest, sometimes at the feet, and in rare cases set between the legs. This pattern was not random. It suggested a ritual, a final act of respect for men who had died by the sword. Iron rings, still locked around some ankles, added another layer to the story. These restraints were heavy, not the sort used for transport, but for holding a man in place. They may have been symbolic, a reminder of captivity even in death, or a practical measure for the living. Alongside the bones, fragments of pottery and animal bones hinted at offerings, perhaps food for the journey beyond. One skeleton stood out among the rest. This man was young, powerfully built, and had survived wounds that would have ended weaker men. His head had been removed with a single, deliberate stroke, and then placed back with the body. The burial showed a level of attention that set him apart. The osteologist noted every detail, not knowing that, years later, his bones would reveal a story that stretched far beyond the city of York. The laboratory study began with the bones themselves. Each skeleton showed a catalogue of injuries, but certain patterns stood out. Defensive wounds on the forearms and hands, some healed and others fresh, suggested repeated close combat. Several men had survived broken arms or fractured ribs, only to return to fight again. The trauma was not the kind seen on soldiers from the front lines. There were no arrowheads, no signs of cavalry weapons, and none of the standard military gear was found in these graves. Instead, the objects buried with the dead, pottery fragments, animal bones, and heavy iron rings, spoke of a different world. These were not the grave goods of legionaries or officers. The iron rings, still locked around the ankles of some, hinted at a life spent in captivity or under strict control. The pottery and animal bones could be offerings, perhaps tokens of respect or remnants of a final meal. When the evidence was weighed together, the pattern of wounds, the absence of military equipment, and the nature of the grave goods pointed away from the battlefield. It suggested lives shaped by the arena, not the army. An archaeologist summed it up in a single observation. These men lived and died as fighters, but not as soldiers. The bones demanded a closer look, one that would soon require the tools of modern science. More than a decade after the excavation, a set of 7 skulls was selected for deeper study. The geneticist chose the dense bone of the inner ear, the petrous portion, knowing it is the best place to find ancient DNA. Each sample was handled with care, following strict protocols to avoid contamination. When the results came back, 6 genomes matched those found in Wales and the wider British Isles. Their ancestry placed them close to the local population, their stories rooted in the western edge of the empire. But one skull stood apart. Its DNA clustered with people from the Levant, thousands of miles away, in the lands now called Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. The chemical signatures in his tooth enamel told the same story. Strontium and oxygen isotopes pointed to a childhood spent in a hot, arid place, a climate nothing like the cool, damp air of northern Britain. The team in Dublin repeated the tests and confirmed the finding. The science was clear. This man had crossed continents before his life ended in the arena. His bones, silent for centuries, now spoke of a journey that few could imagine. April of the following year brought a discovery that stunned even the most seasoned researchers. Forensic imaging specialists scanned the bones of one young man from the cemetery, focusing on a cluster of puncture marks along his pelvis and upper thigh. The micro-CT images revealed deep circular wounds, each the width of a man's thumb, with smooth walls and a rim of new bone. Drag marks trailed from the punctures, scoring the surface where something powerful had pulled and twisted the flesh. The pattern did not match any blade or tool from the Roman world. When the scans were compared to a reference collection of animal injuries, the closest match came from the jaws of a lion. The shape and spacing of the wounds aligned with the canines of a large male, the kind brought into amphitheaters for public spectacle. What set these injuries apart was not just their violence, but their healing. Dense layers of new bone had begun to bridge the wounds, evidence that the man survived for several weeks after the attack. He fought on, carrying the scars of the arena until his final day. The specialist paused over the scan, reflecting on the story written in bone, a story of endurance and of a life lived on the edge between survival and spectacle. Strontium and oxygen isotope results revealed a striking pattern. These men were not all born in the same place. Most showed chemical signatures matching the soils and waters of the British Isles, but several stood out as non-local. One man's enamel captured the memory of a childhood spent far to the east, in a land of dry heat and bright sun. The amphitheatre in Roman York drew crowds of thousands, yet the fighters themselves came from many corners of the empire. Roman law classified gladiators as property. They were bought, sold and trained in schools called ludi, their legal status closer to slaves than to citizens. Yet their recruitment stretched across regions, and their presence on the sands of distant arenas spoke to the empire's reach. The bones in York's cemetery reveal a paradox. Men of low status, gathered from far-off provinces, were brought together for a single brutal purpose. Roman law stripped these men of personhood, classifying them as property to be bought and sold. Yet the evidence from their graves tells a more complicated story. Each body was placed with care, the limbs arranged, the head returned to the chest or feet, and grave goods set beside them. The arrangement of pottery and animal bones suggests a final meal, perhaps a gesture of comfort or remembrance. Bones show signs of repeated injuries that had healed, fractures reset, wounds mended, revealing that someone invested in their recovery. These men ate diets rich enough to build muscle and support healing, a level of care not given to ordinary slaves. The graves form ordered rows, each one marked by attention to detail. In death, they received a respect that their legal status in life denied them. One historian reflects that they were denied freedom, but not dignity. The paradox lingers. Men treated as expendable in the arena, honored in the earth. Thousands of miles from home, a young man's bones still speak. DNA cuts through centuries, revealing lives uprooted by empire, remembered only in silence and earth. Dignity in death is all that remains. What stories lie buried beneath our own streets?